listeners of the T.R.O.N Podcast. This is your host, Rashad Woods. Today, I have a very special guest today who I'm very honored and pleasure to get a chance to speak with. She took time out of her busy schedule, global force for good, works in nonprofits, and helps women globally. Lindsey Struck.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Appreciate your time. So, first of all, I think I always like the guests to tell their story, and your accomplishments are very, very high level. And you're a global traveler with all your accomplishments as well, too, particularly in the nonprofit sector. So please, for our audience, tell us about yourself.
Well, I think what is the most surprising about my career trajectory is that I've landed in a place that I think is a beautiful blend of hobby and what I love to do outside of work, and creating change through my work globally with women in our supply chains that work in handcraft.
Yeah, and I saw that. And so, take us from the very beginning. You obviously graduated with a master's degree, and you've obviously I believe it was in international relations, if I'm not mistaken, international development, excuse me, and Duquesne University. So can you explain how your path led to that? Did you travel somewhere as a kid? Did you do, fundraising and even church charity or something like that to really spawn this kind of growth in your career?
Yeah, I think, I'm from a very small town in very rural Pennsylvania. And, I think that in many ways has shaped my, it was quiet, it was peaceful, it was small. And so I went to school and I was in a city. It was Pittsburgh, which is not a huge city, but it was a city. And the excitement about that and the combination of that and the university I went to, Duquesne University, is very service-minded. And so I had this opportunity to kind of bring together excitement and city, and that really lit me up. But then I was also really dropped into a very service-oriented program and university. And so between the two of those, I sort of started to forge a path. I have sort of the undergrad was focused on communications and marketing. But then my graduate degree is in international development, trying to understand how we can use what systems exist and use our talents and use our energies to create change. And that can be really small or really macro. And so that's sort of where I started. My first job out of grad school is in Moscow, Russia.
I saw that. That's not usually I did an internship at Sears Corporate when I was in college, right? So, that's not exactly that's not even on my radar right now. So how was that? I saw you were there for 1 year. What was that like?
I was, it was in graduate school, and the option on the table was we had to do some sort of externship. And I said, there was one in Nicaragua and there was one in Moscow, and Moscow paid. And so I said, So, we're still motivated no matter how much good we want to do.
For sure.
There's still a little bit, we still had to pay the bills.
You're a human being. There has to be some sort of right. There's no shame in asking to be able to buy a meal for yourself.
Exactly. But what was really interesting, and I look back on it in fondness now, and it was really hard then, but I was definitely paid, but not very much. And one of the ways that I'm going to say it forged some sort of character development in me, but I didn't have a place to live when I was in Moscow. So what I would do, I had a wonderful network of colleagues and folks who were in and around the community that I was working in. I was working for a nonprofit there. I just apartment sat for everyone. So I just here. Yeah. And I just, whenever someone would leave to go on a travel or home,
you figured it out.
I would just apartment sit.
I'd say this, and I obviously I don't want to dive too deep into politics, but people have so often, you would hear people in ballet would go to Russia. John Bernthal, the actor, took acting in Russia. So, it's crazy that, the way things are obviously now when it comes to, how it is versus that. But even when I was in college, they had international retail and people would go do their externships in Russia as well, too. So for people with, who are younger, that was a normal thing to do, that people were able to do those things and go there.
It was, and there was such a vibrant and active community of expats, and in both U.S. but also European. I'm sure that has changed, but it really wasn't something that was so unique when that happened. But it really kind of set my trajectory on my career trajectory on a path, looking at how we can use private sector, corporation to advance social missions. And that's Nest. And that's sort of where I am right now.
Yeah.
There was a bit of a detour between then and now, of course. But I think what connects those two sort of starting career moment with where I am now is understanding how we can unlock systems and corporation and private sector and things that maybe are broken on their sort of face sometimes for good, and how that works within our particularly craft and handmade and fashion supply chains.
Of course. So obviously, one of the big things that's a big focus is obviously making sure that the conditions that people are doing handcraft bags for major big box retailers and brands, that they are actually not, we've all heard the sweatshop stories and things like that. So, and there's a lot more enlightenment about that issue. I remember even hearing about it when I was, 10, 11, 12 years old. Has it gotten better from where the stories and images have to now? Is there more accountability?
There is more accountability. And I think, we have power as consumers, as individuals, to shape how corporations are responding to our purchasing power. And so I think there is something in that to say, there's something that each of us can actually do with the decisions we make about what we buy that does have an impact on the priorities and the accountability of companies. It's not an overnight shift, but there is definitely power in that decision.
Right.
And so, there certainly is improvement. And I think what has been really interesting about the work that Nest does is that think about your sweatshop, think about the four-walled institution, factories. A lot of them do have compliance measures, but they're four walls.
Right.
Production happens inside that. Wonderful. And today we can take a checklist and we can say, is there child labor here? No, I don't see any children on the floor.
Right.
How safe is everyone? Yes, I see a fire extinguisher over here. When production's happening informally in communities and in people's homes, and some the accountability and the visibility and transparency into that,
for sure,
didn't exist before Nest. And so I think that's been a really special part of history to be part of.
Well, what's interesting too is obviously when we talk about globally how things have been shaped when it comes to supply chain and compliance and safety. In the United States of America, the only reason we actually instituted those basic safety measures is in New York City. They had that great fire in the garment factory when, it's a good idea to lock the exit doors. There's no stairs. There's no fire extinguishers. And by the way, when you're running hot equipment with a lot of flammable items, hundreds of immigrant women died. And that's when everybody was like, oh my God, people couldn't even see what was going to take place long term about that, and that's when everything got changed.
And it's so disappointing that tragedy has to be sort of the spur for that. I mean, you see that with Rana Plaza and some of the changes in global safety measures too. And it's
Bangladesh, right? That was Bangladesh, right? Or was that Sri Lanka?
In Bangladesh.
Okay.
It's
tragic.
You don't want to wait for the tragedy to happen. You want to be proactive, but what happens after, if that's sort of the optimism is understanding now, what do we do to fix this, prevent it from happening again?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, does it get more complicated now that obviously, which you spoke on earlier, where now you have the Etsy's of the world where people can sell things more independently. And now you're like, okay, I have to go to more of these nooks and crannies of people who knew nothing but being sort of quote unquote abused or had no idea of basic level, to your point where, okay, I'm here to actually help you. Is there a gap that also, so it's kind of two questions. Number one, how hard is it to get those places that are smaller, intricate communities, build trust, language and culture barrier at the same time?
Beautiful question. I think it's really difficult. And I think one of the beauties of it is that handcraft and the creation of sort of the skills and techniques, they exist in every culture, in every community, in every country in the world. There's beautiful embroidery techniques in one area of the world, and hand woven silks in India. And so you do have the prevalence, as I guess is what I'm saying, of handcraft is everywhere. And so it's not hard to find, but sort of the individuals ensuring that there is visibility through a supply chain, that's the tricky part. Often because there's many layers of what we call subcontracting, where payment and work request is moving hands before it gets from that main vendor down to the final, the artisan, the individual who's doing the handcraft. And so the more that we can shorten that supply chain, or the more that we can at least bring visibility and transparency to that supply chain, it becomes easier. But then to the point that you were making about the cultural barriers and language barriers, it is so important. And this is sort of from the international development background and sort of global development. It's so important that we partner locally. We do that across the US in different communities. The trust and the bridging of that is something that we can help facilitate as a nonprofit, but we cannot always do, because that is a foreign culture and foreign space for us. But figuring out how to partner right is really hard. And that's
Yeah, because, and this is coming from just my perspective as a reader and a listener. Obviously, some countries may want financial compensation, local government. I mean, I'm just calling it, I've read about that, right? So, that can be the case. Unfortunately, people can start wanting to put their hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, when they want to know what's for them, particularly in places that may not have a democracy, so to speak, where they can, have layers, and it's like, oh no, you just got to deal with this person or this body, and you have to grease the wheels, so to speak. And I'm sorry that takes place, and I don't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, but I'm sure, unfortunately, within your organization, there's some things that take place that are not so pretty.
It does, and I think one of the maybe it's an optimistic view of handcraft is that with organizations like Nest, and I am obviously partial, but with organizations like Nest and bringing that visibility into what's happening, it actually does create space for safe working. Women who may have had to leave their families, get on buses, commute into an urban area, stay in dorms to do the garment work that they were doing, and then come back on the weekends, or what can happen between those two places, it can be unsavory. It can be unsafe.
Of course.
Being able to contribute to conditions that help create a safer, better alternative to be at home, to be family, to be in community, and still earn a dignified and good wage is pretty optimistic.
Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I find, your work, when people think of handcrafting, I always think of like Silk Road, right? So the reason why global trade first took place was because of garments and clothing and material, because people couldn't get things in their travels, and they realized, hey, it started setting up currency, and it started setting up marketplaces to, whether it was fur, whether it was, places in India and Pakistan. And it's just fascinating how, centuries of that is ultimately what you're a part of as well, too.
That's a beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah.
And hopefully then, there is an awakening over time. I mean, we've been around for 20 years and hopefully another 20, but over time, an awakening to a different way of doing this. And maybe that's sort of our history, but what is the future? Can we more directly engage with, and you're seeing this across industries, but more directly engage with and see the end producer. I don't know if you came across this statistic, but handcraft as an industry, as an economy, is the second largest employer of women globally after agriculture.
Really? I did not know that.
Think about where are women working globally in our entire world?
That's
agriculture, craft.
Right.
And so the potential to unlock a lot of economic opportunity,
for sure,
it's pretty huge.
It does, now that it makes sense to me, because, sometimes we get zip coded, so to speak, right? Like, I think that just because I drive in the same neighborhood, past the same stop signs, you forget that there's an entire, place that's your area is not your world. It's not the world, so to speak, right? So, it didn't even dawn on me. And then you have, different climates and places all over the area where, in a lot of places, I don't want to say underdeveloped, but are just not as robust in downtown big market too, right? So there certainly can be where they have to sustain their own communities and feed and clothe their own areas, respectively.
And, there are such amazing artisan and craft, we'll call them vendors, but businesses that are in every corner of the world that are doing what they do with a very strong social mission. So it's interesting to be sort of, as a nonprofit and as Nest, we're sort of a convener of these amazing social entrepreneurs who are doing what they do through craft to create change. They're figuring out how to set a community where they are. You're right, that sort of local market doesn't change for people in that market that quickly. Right. And so figuring out what those social lenses are on why work is happening somewhere, we're able to support that. We can help an artisan vendor in, India invest in a particular community that needs economic revitalization. Right? There's, women who are coming out of industries or situations that are really traumatic. A lot of businesses that's why they exist.
Correct.
That sort of exit.
Absolutely. So how is it when you start partnering with these larger corporations that want to, number one, obviously, sell their goods and be partnered because, maybe they can get the newest fashion line that is handcraft woven, because that's a big booming market where people may want to say, I don't want to just buy what's at this particular retailer. I can get something that's handcrafted. That's become more of an explosion with online. So how has the partnerships worked with your larger partners getting involved with this?
It's often complex, but also, worth it. But it sometimes can take years to go from an early conversation through to product on shelf. Okay. And there are different ways that we typically can partner with corporations. Sometimes it's direct sourcing. We are Corporation A. We would love hand-woven baskets for our storage department. And so we can work to identify in the right countries with the right size and dimensions, the things that they're trying to source. And so we can facilitate that relationship. We can support on compliance or standards that relate to informal work. Are folks being paid fairly? Are there wage records? That.
Right.
We also can facilitate design collaborations, which is really fun and interesting. So a design brand might come and say, we're running a capsule collection and we really want to feature silks in the collection. And so we can help facilitate connections between the two. And ensuring that we're sort of we're not in the middle, but we sort of matchmake and ensure that there's sort of advocacy for what's best and what's in the best interest of the artisan businesses.
Well, too, and I'm just thinking of it like at the end of the day, let's say if you're a large big box retailer or you're somebody who needs that sector, you may not have the deployed resources and time to actually be able to say, okay, I'm going to send my team over here with no connections, no sort of structure in place to be able to talk to this small community, that has a language and cultural barrier. I'd rather partner with Nest and be able to facilitate that and be, I don't want to say the very good business partner to be able to facilitate a positive outcome.
Yes, I think that's a great way of saying it. It is, we're trying to facilitate that positive outcome. And it often is that, we are an expert in this. We do, the compliance, the ethical process, the different types of craft techniques and things that need to happen, dyeing.
Oh, my goodness.
Hand machines that are shaping metal for earrings and bag, sort of the handles on bags and things like that. I mean, there is an expertise that we bring that is often outsourced. And even sometimes with vendors that are already working with.
Of course.
But they'll just say, you know what, this is a vendor we really want to continue to invest in. And so Nest, can you please come in and make sure as we continue and expand that investment, that everything looks great and that the women and the artisans who are working in that business are cared for and safe.
Yeah, because, and I say this very, very respectfully, there is also unfortunately like piracy and company and people who, I just watched the documentary on the Somali pirates, right? When they were, and you see like these people have to have valuable things that are having to go through dangerous waters and dangerous places. And now there could be a case where less than stellar people, because businesses and partners are what could be a lower poor community, suddenly has robust business involved. It can sometimes bring bad actors into the situation. How does I don't want to ask anything uncomfortable. Is that something that you guys have to navigate as best you can answer that?
I might answer it in an interesting way, because we don't usually encounter that. It sort of lives with the within sort of the brand or retailer sort of jurisdiction. But what we do run into is often IP.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That really makes it. Oh my gosh. Counterfeit. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh.
You've got these beautiful indigenous designs with indigenous communities all over the world, in Peru, in Thailand, intentionally or not intentionally, and I
duplicated
think
and stolen.
You have designers going and discovering and being inspired, and that line between being inspired and
intellectual theft.
Yeah, it's pretty fine. And so we do often encounter that sort of piracy. How are we informing and supporting businesses when it comes to cultural IP and cultural design IP?
It's funny too, like it's almost like the telephone wars, right? Like, Alexander Graham Bell, I forgot the gentleman he was having the patent war with. If you look it up, it's crazy, right? Like, and forgive me for not knowing it on the spot, but there was a big deal about who invented the telephone first, when actually, long story short, obviously Alexander Graham Bell won that war. But if you look up, for people who are listening, when it comes to who's the tradition or the first person that gets credit, it's money involved. It's really, really lucrative. And so, does the woman in the small indigenous community get the credit for it? Or is it the designer who, got a sample, made a couple tweaks, patented it, and then unfortunately, the rest is unfortunate history.
That's so true. And that is one of the ways that we do work with brands, and particularly at the moment, because there is such upheaval with corporations and tariffs and bottom lines and all of this. One of the ways to kind of avoid direct product is also to license. And so we are kind of in that world as well.
Yeah.
Brands and artisan businesses who can design, bringing those together. And to your point, does the artisan get paid? Are they getting credit? What does that credit look like? How are we involving those individual designers in the process of transforming their IP, their design, into something that the brand would like to use and thinks is marketable?
Yeah, because it'd be bad if somebody got a flat fee because that's the most money they've ever seen in their entire life. And then next thing you know, 2 years later, the biggest pop star in the world is wearing this outfit, selling it through the big box retailer, and somebody 7,000 miles away got burned, right? Because maybe they did.
Time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's crazy. It's unfortunate because I just started thinking about that. I'm like, how often does that really happen?
It happens in the US. It happens with a lot of the indigenous communities around the world that we work with. And I think we are, the optimistic side of that is that I think there is increasing pressure on brands to disclose that information.
Of course.
Give credit, make sure that is very clear. I mean, we're seeing that with other, read the news, and there are some stories that are coming out around brands that didn't do that well or didn't do it right. And sometimes the criticism is well placed. Sometimes it's a little bit maybe misguided, but I think the point is people are asking to make sure that we're giving credit as conscious consumers. And that's a really encouraging
for sure,
motivation.
It gets murky because, it's like music. There's only so many notes that can be played in music. So it's, it gets very murky where there's only so many, I don't say so many designs because I can't scribble inside the lines. Okay. So I'm not coming from a place of anybody's create anything except talking on this show. But, it gets murky because people will sit back and say, well, you can't copyright stitching. You can't copyright a pattern, right? Or patent it, or whatever the terminology is appropriate. So it does get very legalese when it comes to what exactly can be actually held credit for a respective person.
It's such an interesting field. One of the things that Nest does for the vendors, for the businesses, the artisans, and the craft folks is support them through educational materials. And we have a huge series on cultural and design IP and what that means. When is it inspiration? When are you taking it too far?
Yeah.
Is there a community when no one owns it, but it represents a community? How do you take that design or that iconography and use that in a respectful way? So you're spot on with that. It's what's that line? And when am I on the right side or the wrong side of it? It's really tricky, but we try and bring experts in to fill in those gaps where we don't know best as an organization. But I think that's part of the power of Nest. In some ways, a lot about compliance and supply chain, but we also know that there's so much more to that. And so who can we bring in to really support and be cross industry, cross sector partners in supporting this handcraft economy.
So how many employees are with the company, if I could ask, real?
We have 34.
Wonderful. And so I just didn't know, on your global reach, if you had a global, if there were, I know there's partners and third parties and things of that nature, but directly with you, 34. Okay.
34 directly employed. And that is, we have staff all over the world. We did have an office in New York for years, and post-pandemic closed our office. And so we're all remote. So we've kind of got a good spread across time zones, and of course use local partners for a lot of the on the ground work, but 34 strong.
That's absolutely fantastic. I really legitimately I've had wonderful guests, but like being able to be like you're like a History Channel meets like the ultimate supply chain. And it's like, man, like I watch documentaries because every time I hear you talk, I keep thinking of, people from 700-800 years ago who were literally just setting up ports and shops, selling goods and materials and being merchants. And that was the beginning of facilitation of larger transactions that took place. And, picture yourself as somebody from a particular country and you see all these goods that this country has. And, we can get into the good, the bad, and the ugly that took place. But just the visual of like, oh my gosh, you guys make this. Like, oh my gosh, you all make this. And then you go back to your country and you say, they have all this here. There's something that has to take place to get something involved with us in this. And yes, it was ugly. We all know things didn't go. We know the dark side to it. But eventually, like seeing how the world evolved and how you can have these clothes from these other places and have these merchant ports and you can have these, it just blows your mind.
It really was the first and original true luxury is some of the like beautiful colors and fabrics that were created. And just, it's so inspiring to be part of a company and to see the creativity and the humanity, especially in an age where we have so much AI and technology and to touch and to feel and to see and to know that someone created something so beautiful.
Right.
It's really inspiring every day.
Yeah, like a lot of major clothing makers started because they had to clothe soldiers for war, right? So that's how the beginning of it started. I believe it was Louis Vuitton, right? He gave like it was I don't want to muddle the story, but it was like, when people would travel and they needed bags to carry for either royalty or soldiers and things like this, you start making handbags. And then the greatest luxury brand in the world started in that manner, right? When, soldiers' uniforms and giving princes and dignitaries clothing, that's where the beginning of a lot of this stuff took place. And it's wonderfully fascinating when you get down that wormhole.
It sure is.
Yeah, it really is. And so my question to you is that where can people find Lindsey Struck? Where can people find Nest? And I have another question is, how are the rights of women globally based on what you've experienced versus being back home because you've had such a large global impact?
On the first, you can find us at buildanest.org. There are a few companies out there called Nest, but we are at buildanest.org. Don't be confused there, but that's where you can find us. There's opportunities to join the team all the time, as well as volunteer. So many of the folks who partner with Nest, we call them fellows, but they're professionals like you and me and others who just know a lot about their industry, about their job, and can help artisan businesses. If you are, chief marketing officer, or you are, a creative and understanding you've got sort of that, product development background. Right. Artisan businesses and the leaders that we support are looking for that mentorship and looking for that investment in counsel. And so we bring those folks together. So that's another way. So email us and we can sort of help you use your professional skills and volunteer in that way. And then as far as sort of the global outlook on sort of empowerment and ways in which Nest at least is supporting the economic inclusion of women globally. I think the more that we as consumers, as people, as individuals who have money to spend, as the more that we can invest that money in products that are beautiful and that are made by individuals that are paid fairly and working in safe conditions, the better we'll be. And one of the other ways you can find Nest is on the hang tag on the items that you buy. So we have a seal.
Oh, wow. Wow.
For certification. So you can know that the basket you bought has been vetted, that we have physically gone to the place of production, watched, looked, reviewed the records, and can say that this woman made this basket and she was paid fairly and I watched it happen. And so you can feel good about it.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful feeling. It really, truly is. And the internet, obviously we all know, there's the great side of it, right? Where it's brought attention to these things and it's held people accountable and it's made a force of change and good. And that's what the good part of the internet has accomplished. And I got to be honest, like I said, I don't get blown away a lot. I've had a chance to talk to wonderful people on this show. But like, there was something about this one in particular, because I was like, man, she's got this global footprint. And it's like, I'm not sure where this conversation is going to go, but it literally felt like I was watching a little bit like the History Channel or a Discovery Channel in a way, because it just took my mind to like all these things that I Google all the time and just watch. So
you were too kind. It was a wonderful conversation. You are just an outstanding host. I loved this conversation. Thank you for letting us be part of it.
Oh, of course. And like I said, I look forward to future conversations, because, half an hour doesn't do justice to the work you do. So thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.